Archaeologists in Jerusalem have discovered a series of mysterious underground rooms near where the second Jewish temple is believed to have stood about 2,000 years ago.
World history does not usually change overnight. It erodes slowly, shaped by time, debate, and fragments pulled from dust. But every so often, something happens that forces humanity to stop, re-examine everything it thought it knew, and confront the possibility that the past is not what we were taught. Today we are standing at the edge of one of those moments, because beneath the Temple Mount, arguably the most contested and sacred site on Earth, scientists have uncovered something that has left experts unsettled, officials silent, and historians deeply uncomfortable. What began as a routine structural concern has spiraled into a discovery so sensitive that even acknowledging its existence has become controversial. The Temple Mount is not just a location. It is a fault line of belief, identity, and power. To Jews, it is the holiest site on earth, once home to the first and second temples. To Muslims, it is Haram al-Sharif, the noble sanctuary, housing the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock. To Christians, it is inseparable from biblical prophecy and ancient Jerusalem. Every stone is sacred, every inch politically explosive. Excavation here is not simply restricted, it is almost unthinkable. And yet, something forced the authorities to look below the surface. The official story begins quietly. Minor concerns were raised about subsurface stability near existing underground passages. Nothing dramatic, nothing alarming. Engineers were asked to conduct non-invasive scans to ensure structural integrity. Ground-penetrating radar, seismic imaging, density mapping, tools designed to see without touching. What those instruments revealed, however, did not match any existing records, maps, or historical documentation. Beneath layers thought to be solid bedrock were voids, large ones, symmetrical ones, chambers not formed by nature, but by deliberate design. At first, technicians assumed calibration errors. The scans were repeated, different teams, different equipment. The results were the same. Beneath the Temple Mount existed a network of hollowed spaces far deeper and more extensive than anything previously acknowledged. Some appeared connected, others isolated, all of them old, uncomfortably old. Here is where the story becomes strange. These voids were not aligned with known Roman, Byzantine, or Islamic construction phases. Their orientation did not follow typical architectural logic of any recognized period. And most disturbing of all, initial material samples taken from micro-debris suggested an age that predated the traditionally accepted timeline of monumental construction in Jerusalem. Carbon dating is not magic. It has margins of error. Scientists know this. But when multiple samples across different chambers repeatedly point to the same era, dismissing the data becomes difficult. The estimated age placed portions of these underground structures thousands of years earlier than expected. Earlier than Solomon, earlier than David, earlier than the earliest known large-scale stone architecture in the region. That creates a problem, because history, as currently written, does not allow for such advanced subterranean construction at that time. The technology, organization, and labor coordination simply should not have existed. And yet, the evidence was there, silently waiting beneath one of the most studied sites on the planet. This is where ancient texts re-enter the conversation. For centuries, passages from religious manuscripts were treated as metaphor, allegory, or theological symbolism. References to hidden chambers, foundations laid by unknown hands, and structures built upon something far older were often ignored by mainstream archaeology. Now, those same passages are being reread with unease, because they no longer sound poetic. They sound descriptive. Non-biblical sources complicate matters further. Ancient writings from neighboring civilizations speak of Jerusalem as a place already ancient when their own histories began. A city built upon ruins of something forgotten. A sacred center inherited, not created. These texts were always considered mythic exaggeration. Until now. What makes this discovery even more unsettling is what has not happened. There has been no press conference, no peer-reviewed publication, no official briefing explaining the findings. Instead, there has been delay after delay. Requests for transparency met with procedural language, leaks quietly dismissed, silence where there should be excitement. This is not how archaeology usually behaves. Discoveries of this magnitude are career-defining, funding securing, legacy cementing, and yet those involved have gone quiet. Some were reassigned, others declined interviews. A few resigned entirely. That alone raises questions. Behind closed doors, experts are divided. Some argue the structures represent an unknown early culture, possibly erased by later civilizations. Others believe they indicate continuous occupation far earlier than believed. A minority, rarely quoted, suggests something more disruptive, that human history in this region is missing chapters entirely. Why does this matter now? Because history is not just about the past. It defines identity, ownership, legitimacy. If the foundations of Jerusalem predate known civilizations, then modern claims built on historical timelines become fragile. And in a place where history justifies borders, that is dangerous. Governments understand this. Religious authorities understand this, which is why caution has replaced curiosity. Any revelation beneath the Temple Mount does not just rewrite textbooks. It destabilizes narratives that millions depend on. What we are witnessing is not denial. It is containment. Information released slowly, carefully, stripped of implication. A strategy designed not to inform the public, but to manage reaction. Because once people realize that one of the most sacred places on Earth is built atop something far older and unexplained, questions will follow that cannot be easily answered. Were earlier civilizations more advanced than we admit? Did organized society emerge sooner than believed? How many other sites hide similar truths beneath official history? And most unsettling of all, what else remains buried, waiting for the moment it can no longer be ignored? For now, access remains restricted. Further investigation paused under the language of preservation and respect. But the data already exists. It has been recorded, copied, analyzed, and information, once uncovered, has a way of resurfacing. The ground beneath the Temple Mount has not moved, but the ground beneath our understanding of history has begun to crack. And when it finally gives way, the world may have to confront a past far older, far stranger, and far more complex than we were ever prepared to accept. Continuing in the same uninterrupted cinematic documentary tone, picking up exactly where the narrative leaves off. And that possibility is precisely what frightens institutions the most. Because once a historical framework collapses, it cannot be selectively repaired. It must be rebuilt from the ground up. And beneath the Temple Mount, the ground itself is now the problem. What few people realize is that this is not the first time anomalies beneath the site have been quietly acknowledged. For decades, maintenance crews, religious caretakers, and infrastructure engineers have reported unexplained cavities, sudden sinkholes, and strange airflow patterns rising through ancient stone. These reports were usually dismissed as natural erosion or remnants of known tunnels. But in hindsight, they read less like coincidences and more like warnings. The newly identified chambers differ from previously catalogued underground features in one critical way: precision. Their walls show intentional shaping, right angles, and load-bearing geometry inconsistent with primitive excavation. These are not caves widened by hand over generations. They are engineered spaces, designed, planned, executed with knowledge of stress distribution and long-term stability. Some chambers appear to serve no obvious practical purpose. They are not storage rooms, not water cisterns, not burial crypts. Their size, shape, and placement suggest something symbolic or ceremonial. That alone has reignited debates scholars thought were long settled. Because if these spaces were ceremonial, then the culture that built them possessed a complex belief system long before the eras traditionally credited with religious sophistication. Even more troubling are the materials. Trace analysis of tool marks indicates stoneworking techniques inconsistent with known Bronze Age methods. The cuts are too clean, too uniform, not machine-made, but also not crude. This has led to quiet speculation about lost or transitional technologies, techniques developed, refined, and then forgotten. This is where comparisons begin to emerge. Göbekli Tepe, Baalbek, ancient sites that seemed impossible until they were undeniable. Each time, history adjusted reluctantly, dragging its feet while evidence piled up. The Temple Mount, however, is different. Its symbolic weight makes adjustment far more dangerous. Because this site is not isolated, it is foundational. Entire theological narratives are built on the assumption that what lies beneath it begins with known biblical history. If that assumption fails, then chronology itself must be re-examined, not reinterpreted, rewritten. Unsurprisingly, reactions from religious authorities have been cautious to the point of avoidance. Official statements emphasize preservation, respect, and continuity, words chosen carefully to reassure, not explain. Behind the scenes, however, theological scholars are wrestling with implications that cannot be publicly addressed without causing shockwaves. If sacred structures were built atop something older, what was that earlier sanctity? Who worshipped here first? And why was their presence erased rather than remembered? These questions are not merely academic. They touch identity, inheritance, and divine narrative, which is why silence remains the preferred response. International institutions are no less uneasy. UNESCO, archaeological councils, and academic journals are aware of the data. Yet publication has stalled, peer review delayed, requests for independent verification quietly redirected. The language of bureaucracy becomes a shield, allowing time to pass while pressure builds. Meanwhile, unofficial discussions tell a different story. Researchers privately acknowledge that the Temple Mount discovery aligns with a growing body of evidence suggesting that human civilization is older and more complex than current models allow. Not in isolated pockets, but globally, as if advanced knowledge periodically surfaced, vanished, and resurfaced again. If that pattern is real, then the Temple Mount is not an anomaly. It is a node, a convergence point where forgotten history intersects with living belief. This realization reframes the entire debate. The question is no longer whether something ancient exists beneath the Temple Mount. The question is why so many powerful systems are invested in keeping its full story untold. Because once the public understands that history has been curated, not simply discovered, trust erodes. And when trust erodes, authority weakens. Social media has already begun filling the vacuum. Fragmented leaks, anonymous claims, blurred images of scans and diagrams circulate without context. Some are accurate, others exaggerated, but together they signal a loss of narrative control. The official silence has not prevented speculation, it has fueled it. This is how information wars begin, not with announcements, but with absences. What happens next is uncertain, but trends are visible. Pressure for transparency will grow. Independent researchers will demand access. Governments will face calls to explain what they know and when they knew it. And eventually, someone will decide that controlled disclosure is safer than continued denial. When that happens, the story of the Temple Mount will change forever. Not because it loses its sacredness, but because it gains depth. A depth that stretches beyond recorded scripture, beyond accepted dynasties, beyond the comfortable boundaries of known history. And that may be the most unsettling discovery of all, because if one of humanity's most sacred sites is built upon forgotten foundations, then perhaps our entire understanding of the past rests on similar ground, stable enough to stand on, but hiding truths beneath the surface that we are only now beginning to uncover. The Temple Mount still stands. Tourists still walk its perimeter. Prayers still rise into the air. Life continues as if nothing has changed. But beneath those stones, something has already shifted. History has not been rewritten yet, but it has been challenged. And once challenged, it can never return to what it was. And that challenge is growing louder with every passing month. Quietly, methodically, the way the most disruptive truths always do. Because discoveries like this do not explode into the world all at once. They seep, They pressure. They force cracks in carefully maintained narratives until those narratives can no longer hold their shape. Behind the scenes, internal debates have intensified. Some researchers argue that full disclosure is inevitable and should be embraced. They believe the public is more capable of nuance than institutions assume. Others warn that releasing incomplete data could ignite misinformation, religious unrest, or political instability. In a region already balanced on historical fault lines, even a minor shift in perceived legitimacy can ripple outward with unpredictable force. This fear has shaped every decision so far. Language is scrutinized. Findings are compartmentalized. Each expert is shown only what they need to know. But compartmentalization has limits. Science does not thrive in isolation, and evidence has a way of connecting itself, whether permission is granted or not. What is becoming increasingly clear is that the underground structures beneath the Temple Mount were not accidental. Their placement aligns with celestial orientations observed in other ancient sacred sites. Subtle angles, invisible from the surface, mirror solstice positions and star alignments that would have required precise astronomical knowledge. Knowledge that, according to conventional history, should not have existed at the time these chambers were constructed. This revelation has quietly reignited a long-dismissed question. Were ancient societies more scientifically advanced than we give them credit for, or did they inherit knowledge from a source we no longer remember? That question is deeply uncomfortable for modern institutions, because it challenges the idea of linear progress. It suggests that history is not a straight ascent from ignorance to enlightenment, but a series of rises and collapses, peaks followed by erasure. If that is true, then the people who built beneath the Temple Mount were not primitives laying the groundwork for civilization. They were inheritors or innovators of a system that later societies built over, forgot, and mythologized. Even the layout of Jerusalem itself begins to look different through this lens. Streets that seem organically evolved may follow patterns imposed long before current maps existed. Sacred routes, processional paths, and symbolic boundaries may trace origins far older than the religions now associated with them. This reframing does not diminish faith, but it complicates it. And complexity is harder to control than certainty. Some scholars have quietly proposed that what lies beneath the Temple Mount represents a pre-Abrahamic sacred center, a place already revered before Judaism, Christianity, or Islam emerged. If proven, this would mean that later traditions did not originate sanctity here, but inherited it, built upon it, adapted it. That idea alone is enough to explain the hesitation surrounding public disclosure. Because once sanctity is inherited rather than originated, exclusivity dissolves, and exclusivity has always been the cornerstone of conflict. Meanwhile, international observers have begun to notice patterns of avoidance. Research permits delayed, funding rerouted, conferences postponed. The signals are subtle, but consistent, the kind of signals that suggest coordination rather than coincidence. And yet suppression has never stopped truth indefinitely. It only changes the manner of its arrival. As technology advances, non-invasive scanning becomes cheaper and more accessible. Independent researchers no longer need state approval to analyze publicly available data. Satellite imaging, AI-assisted pattern recognition, and open-source archaeology are democratizing discovery in ways that institutions can no longer fully control. This is why the Temple Mount discovery matters beyond its location. It represents a turning point in who gets to define history. For centuries, the past has been curated by a small number of gatekeepers: governments, religious authorities, academic institutions. But when evidence becomes digital, replicable, and globally shared, control weakens. Interpretation decentralizes. And when interpretation decentralizes, consensus fractures. Already, alternative timelines are being explored in academic shadows, not fringe theories, but cautious re-examinations of long-held assumptions. The dates of early urbanization, the origins of symbolic architecture, the possibility that advanced knowledge emerged earlier, vanished, and was rediscovered rather than invented. The Temple Mount fits disturbingly well into this emerging pattern. It is not an outlier. It is a confirmation point. Which brings us to the most unsettling realization of all. If something this significant could remain hidden beneath the most scrutinized site on Earth, how much else lies undiscovered elsewhere? How many other sacred places are layered atop forgotten civilizations? How many myths are distorted memories of real events? How many chapters of human history were not lost to time, but buried by it? These questions no longer belong to speculation alone. They are now grounded in physical evidence. Evidence that exists, that has been measured, mapped, and verified, even if it has not yet been fully acknowledged. The world may appear calm on the surface. News cycles move on. Attention shifts. But beneath that calm, a reckoning is forming. Because once humanity accepts that its past is deeper and stranger than expected, the future changes too. Our sense of identity expands. Our assumptions weaken. Our humility grows. And perhaps that is the real reason this discovery feels so dangerous. Not because it threatens belief, but because it threatens certainty. The Temple Mount still stands in silence, ancient stones absorbing footsteps, prayers, and history. Beneath it, older stones wait, stones that do not speak, but no longer need to. They have already said enough, and the world is only just beginning to listen. The implications extend far beyond archaeology. They ripple into politics, religion, and even philosophy. If human civilization is older and more sophisticated than current models suggest, then everything we build our identity upon, from borders to belief systems to educational curricula, needs re-evaluation. It is no longer a question of curiosity. It is a matter of understanding who we are and where we came from. Some experts quietly warn that the psychological impact of this knowledge could be profound. Societies built on linear historical narratives may struggle to reconcile the idea that their foundations are inherited rather than original. Leaders understand that control often relies on a shared story, and a story suddenly complicated by evidence older than written memory challenges authority in ways that textbooks cannot contain. Already, murmurs of unease circulate among those who once felt certain about history. Scholars in private conferences speak of pre-dynastic urban planning, lost ceremonial knowledge, and advanced architectural engineering, far earlier than ever acknowledged. They speak in hushed tones, aware that their words, if public, could ignite debates spanning continents, faiths, and governments. Yet despite all this, there is hope. For the first time, the past is beginning to speak for itself. The Temple Mount is not just a religious symbol anymore. It is a bridge to lost knowledge, a challenge to the accepted chronology, and a reminder that humanity's story is far more mysterious than we imagined. One day, the world will see these chambers. Scholars will decipher their secrets. And perhaps finally, we will understand that beneath the sacred stones lies not just history, but the hidden blueprint of human ambition, belief, and ingenuity. The ground beneath the Temple Mount is no longer just rock and dust. It is a threshold, and humanity is standing on the edge of discovering just how deep that threshold goes. The past has been patient, silent, and unyielding, but now, at last, it is insisting we listen.